Hello and welcome to the show. Now, when it comes to rather wacky vehicles, the Ford Supervan is quite high up on that list. A vehicle I'm very glad to have in Horizon 4 because it is completely bonkers. Now, we call it a van. I mean, it's not really much of a van. At the end of the day, it's got a van body over a sort of custom chassis. It's incredibly light, has about 300 horsepower, huge amounts of grip. Now, of course, there are still some downsides to the van body. That doesn't have a huge amount of top speed, truth be told. It's relatively quick accelerating, doesn't have a huge amount of top speed. At the end of the day, 300 horsepower is not bad, but also it's not that much in the grand scheme of things. But the question I had was more just how fast is the Supervan? Now, we've raced the Supervans against themselves. We did a one-make race against themselves. And truth is, at a longer circuit, yes, the lack of top speed would be a little bit of a problem against perhaps similar spec S1 class cars. But what if we were to take the Supervan up, I say a sort of specialist area for it, but an area that was all about handling just what sort of vehicles could the Supervan be quicker than? So, to test this out, we have got a speed zone. Now, this is one of the speed zones that kind of loops its way up a little hairpin road. Now, everything was going to start at the same point. There's a little bit of acceleration, but, you know, it's still going to be a little bit of straight line speed. There's a little bit of acceleration in between these corners. But we're going to do 3 runs with each of the vehicles. Fastest run to be the run that would count, and see just what vehicles the Supervan could go quicker than. Now, this vehicle is being driven completely stock, as are all the vehicles that are going to be running in this one. And so, stock, the Supervan has a huge amount of grip. Now, I'm not sure what tyres it's running on. Visually, it looks like vintage race tyres, but I don't think they give an awful lot of grip. They're much more akin to slicks. Now, it does get an upgrade for the special, sort of full-on slick vintage race tyres, although it's pretty stupidly grippy to begin with, shall we say. So this sort of road should be good for the vehicle. You can carry a lot of corner speed. You can carry an awful lot of speed through the hairpins. It's surprisingly... I say surprising. It's very good. You get a lot of turning with this, and you get a lot of confidence. You can jump on the throttle coming out of these corners, absolutely no problem. Up to 67 miles an hour through this speed zone, which, okay, doesn't sound like a huge amount, but on this particular route, that is not bad going whatsoever. Certainly not, you know, for what is a stock vehicle. Also, we don't have to worry about AI cars because we're in a speed zone. All of the vehicles will be in ghost mode around here. Personally, I prefer to turn it off, but it's what we have to work with in terms of Forza. And also, there was just a random convoy of people drifting around in transits on this particular run. The irony, there's some more of them going on. Don't ask. You just try not to get distracted by them. Anyway, as we go around, this was a much better run for the final one. It's a 68.44 miles an hour. That was the benchmark. And as I said, that's pretty damn fast up here. For what this vehicle, like my fastest is like 78, but I think that was with a 599XX or whatever. So that's not a bad run. So what vehicles were going to compete against it? What vehicles might go quicker? Let's start with something made at a very similar time. The Supervan is from 94, the McLaren F1, 93. Now, at the time, the fastest car in the world was the fastest car in the world for quite a while. Also, I believe still the fastest naturally aspirated car in the world. It's a pretty special vehicle, you know. let's put it like that. The McLaren F1 is a pretty damn special vehicle. It wasn't all about top speed either. You know, it's a decent driving car, so to speak. The first thing you'll notice, the big difference between this and the Ford, is wheel spin. Now, all of the cars are being driven without any assists, as ever, on Horizon 4, and the Transit doesn't spin its wheels at all around here. The McLaren, yeah, that does. Yeah, the McLaren is going to spin its wheels out of these slower corners. Also, you can see the front end does not turn in anywhere near the same in the McLaren. It's a 63 mile an hour run. But yeah, the front end is just nowhere near as good with this car as it is in the Transit. And well, you need quite a lot. You need a lot of grip, basically, running up here. Power is helpful, of course it is, but you do need a lot of grip trying to get the cars around here. Again, I just get caught out. I was always expecting the front end to turn in a little bit better. And again, as soon as you jump on that power, you get a little bit of a slide from the car. You've got to be very careful. It's all super low speed here, trying to find out what gear you want to be in. I mean, we're at 63 miles an hour, almost at the 64 mile, just shy of 64 mile an hour there. Remember, 68 was what we managed to do with the kind of van. I know it's not really, but it's, you know, we're still going to call it a van regardless. So yeah, lined up for another go with this one. Ended up trying to go for sort of a little bit more of a late apex almost on these hairpins, trying to make the most of the acceleration, because this will outrun the Supervan in terms of straight line speed. There's a lot more power, a lot better aero and whatnot. Not that it really gets used around here. It is a better run going for these later apexes. It was 64 miles an hour. Still, you know, it's still 4 miles an hour down on the Transit on what is a fairly short, I'd say fairly slow little run up the hill. So the McLaren, that wasn't going to beat it. Something a little bit more modern, makes a fantastic, fantastic noise. The Lexus LFA. Now, admittedly, you know, these cars are all heavier. While the LFA, it was 3,200 pounds in this one. I know they were obsessed with lightness when trying to build the Lexus. However, it's still over 1,000 pounds heavier than the Transit, and that is quite a lot of weight when it comes to, you know, trying to weave your way around up the mountain. It does have a lot more power in this one. You know, this has got 250 horsepower more than the Transit, and again, top speed-wise, the Lexus would absolutely thrash the Ford, but on this road, that's not so important. Now, there's a little bit better, perhaps, turning with the Lexus. Again, you can see, with this being the first run with the car, I was trying to figure out what we could and couldn't get away with in terms of jumping on the power, and it still sort of slides around. Now, we're not talking big, leery, massive oversteery moments necessarily. You could do it if you wanted to, but you're seeing it just move about a little bit, just waste a little bit of time. A similar sort of pace up here to the McLaren F1. I mean, that goes to show how quick the F1 is. At the end of the day, the LFA is a very, very quick supercar. You know, while they are both down in terms of performance on that Supervan, they are both. The LFA is a very, very quick supercar. So the F1 wasn't all that far down. This is a much, much newer supercar. Again, we see a little bit of moving around. Got to be very careful with the grass. Now, it's tempting to try and almost jump across the inside. That was a bit too much of a slide for the Lexus this time around. It is tempting to try and like jump across the grass to, I say, almost shortcut the circuit. But that is not what you want, and it was a bad run. That big slide cost maybe about a mile an hour average up all of that. But if you put wheels on the grass, it's really easy, especially with these sort of cars. It's easy to get some oversteer, easy to get some trouble. Now, the other runs, nothing went quicker than the first run with the LFA, so it actually lost out to the McLaren F1. Donkervoort up next. We're going for some lightness. It's actually, I think, the only vehicle in this list that's lighter than the Supervan at £1,500, and it's got more power. 375 horsepower in this one. So it's got about 75-ish more horsepower, about 100 more torque than the Supervan. The Donkervoort is pretty mad. The Donkervoort is a pretty wacky vehicle. For all the feature vehicles, already showing sort of the first run and then the fastest of their runs, if the first one wasn't the fastest. So the Donkervoort, well, it's the almost the power delivery that gets the better of this one. It's, as I said, it's a very, very quick car, is the Donkervoort, but it has not got the grip. More specifically, it hasn't really got the rear-end grip to be as consistent as the likes of the Transit. Yes, it absolutely flies in between these corners because the power-to-weight ratio is so very, very good, but it's also sliding its way out of just about everything. That's not what you want. It doesn't really have the front-end grip either. It doesn't have the grip at the end of the day. It doesn't have the grip that you get in the Supervan, and when this thing lets go, that tends to be with sort of quite leery oversteer, if I'm honest. So it was a kind of a balancing act. The car was always probably going to move around a little bit. It was trying to find trying not to lose too much time, trying to get it right. Actually ended up running a little bit deep on the way in. Again, go for that late apex, kind of make the most of the acceleration towards this next corner. It gets over 100 miles an hour towards this next turn, which the Supervan can't quite do, but it's not able to carry the speed. Again, you can see it fighting its way through the corners. It's not as quick as the McLaren F1 either. It's a little too difficult to drive, perhaps, on this course, which is not necessarily a surprise with that car. We move next to an all-wheel drive vehicle. Yes, we have the Guyardo, the Superleggera. All-wheel drive, good for traction. Very good for traction. You know, it's going to get out of the corners. I can jump on the throttle. It's not going to slide around like we saw with the LFA. It's not going to slide around, certainly, like the Donkervoort. Downsides, well, it is a little bit on the heavier side. Again, £3,400, so we are talking quite a bit heavier than the Supervan. Yes, it's got more power. We're well past the 550 horsepower mark, but I didn't really know. I thought the all-wheel drive cars may, I say cheating, that's not not the right word for it, but I thought the all-wheel drive cars were going to be strong naturally because, as you can see, we are immediately jumping on the throttle coming out of these corners. However, it's the front end grip that we don't have with this. You can actually see I'm trying to carry speed through the hairpin there, and it just understeers its way wide. It's not as quick accelerating in between the corners as the Donkervoort. Doesn't lose time sliding around, but it isn't quite getting to the same sort of top speed. It is a 64 mile an hour run on the first bit, so I mean it is quicker than the Donkervoort over the course of the run. Even with that big understeer moment, actually, it beats the Donkervoort and the LFA up the course. The launch is probably one of the areas it does make up, I say, a decent chunk of time on. You know, we're launching the cars. All the vehicles have a fixed, they've all got a fixed launch point in this one to try and keep things as even as possible. And I put it where it was because I didn't want it to be too much of an acceleration test towards the first corner. This is much more about the weaving your way up the mountain. This time around, we don't understeer as wide through that particular corner. Maybe we're a little wide sort of mid-corner again. Just go for that late apex, and we're running across the line. It does go quicker than the McLaren F1 as well. We're getting up towards 65 miles an hour now. Still well short of the Supervan. So the all-wheel drive Lamborghini, I was a bit surprised about that. I thought the all-wheel drive Lamborghini might have been enough. I did really think that might have been enough to do something, but apparently not the case. What if we go a little bit more extreme in terms of cars? I mean, I say that as we've had a McLaren F1, Guyardos, LFAs, etc. What about a road-going race car? A full-on homologation special, the 911 GT1 road car. This is a pretty damn serious piece of kit here. We're again talking well over 500 horsepower. We're still heavier than the Supervan, about 600 pounds heavier than the Supervan, which kind of surprised me in some regards. It is kind of quite a long car going on here. But yeah, I mean, this is a full-on race car at this point. Similar issues. Again, first run, you're always going to find maybe that there's a little bit of learning. But again, we get some of that, we get some of the oversteer, basically. We're trying to use that 500 and so horsepower. The 911 just slides around a little bit too much. I mean, it is pretty quick on this way up the course. Although we're talking about similar kind of levels to the LFA on that first run. There's a little too much sliding around. It was going to have to be a case of trying to tame it, but this is not a problem you ever got with the Supervan. You were never having to, never really fighting the Supervan. You can get the van sliding, but not so much. Admittedly, of course, the GT1 is more built for Le Mans. It's built for the longer circuits. I'm kind of surprised. The gear ratios, I might have expected to be a little bit longer. Sometimes long gear ratio is not necessarily a bad thing going up this course. For this next run, you can see I'm trying really, really hard. I want to get on the throttle as soon as I can out of these corners, but you've got to be really careful not to get those rear wheels. Again, we're going for that later apex, trying to stop the wheel spin. It is quicker up on that third run, I believe that one there was. Back to the 64s again. Not quite beating the Guyardo. I mean, there's a decent speed, but it's also not going to be beating the Ford. Speaking of Fords, we go to the Shelby, the GT350R. Very, very quick, very, very good handling. Kind of, well, I'd say a modern muscle car. It might almost be more of a modern track car. This one, it's much heavier. We're talking 1,500 pounds heavier than the Transit, and that's a big old chunk of weight. But it's also much more modern. I mean, we're talking about 2016 car here, so we've got a lot of modern suspension, modern chassis, modern tech going on in this one. So we can know how good the GT350R is in terms of handling. Now, tyres are a thing that are going to crop up in the all these vehicles are being raced on their standard tyres, on their default tyres, as was the Supervan. Some of these vehicles, this kind of mid S1 class, you're starting to get some cars that come standard on race tyres, some cars that come standard on sort of high-end sport tyres. And I think the GT350R does come standard on some form of race tyres. Certainly, we've suddenly got a lot of front-end grip in this car. The front of the vehicle's actually turning in. It's not sliding around too much. And we can see the speed's gone up. We're up to 66 miles an hour. Still 2 miles an hour down on the Transit here. This is still 2 miles an hour slower than the Transit up the course. Okay, that was the first run, so we reset it again. I mean, you can visually see how much better the front end is turning in. We can get away with a little bit more. It will still excite the rear tyres a smidge if you're if you jump on the throttle too aggressively, you can get the back end sliding around. You see it's just moving ever so slightly. Not really enough to slow the car down all that much, but it is just enough to sort of smoke the tyres a little bit. Again, that late apex run towards the finish line is quicker again, 66.7 for the Shelby. So the fastest vehicle so far hadn't beat the Supervan. Sticking with the American cars. I mean, it's kind of the Shelby's rival, really, isn't it? It only seems fair to get the Camaro ZL11LE. It's quite a long, convoluted, complicated name, but this is another vehicle that is, yeah, it's one hell of a car, is the Camaro. It is quite heavy. It is quite heavy. It's nearly 4,000 pounds, this one. It has more power than the Ford. We're up to 650 horsepower in the Camaro. 650 torque to go with it as well. So it's quite the monstrous vehicle. Again, I believe this one here is another one running on the race tyres, but it has got a lot more heft, shall we say, to take it up the... I say mountain. It's not really a mountain pass or something, but up this wiggly road. Again, you can see the turning in this is pretty damn good. There's still, I mean, you've got 650 horsepower going to the rear wheels. There's still going to be some sliding around. You can see the speed it's taking. We're doing pretty well in terms of speed up here. We're into the 67 mile an hour mark now. The Camaro is quicker than the Shelby. Don't get me wrong, I love the GT350R. I really, really do. And it's of the sort of the track-based modern muscle cars. I think I certainly prefer the looks of the Shelby. The Camaro is brutally quick. I know how fast this car is in Forza as well. It can be incredibly quick in this game. Still doesn't beat the Supervan up the mountain pass. I'm kind of curious, actually. I didn't notice what speed is it getting towards this next corner. It's not... So we see 100 miles an hour on the Donkervoort up towards this final corner. The Camaro's not quite got that level of acceleration. It's just carrying the mid-corner speed. We're going quicker. I mean, it's up to 67.8, I think that was, in terms of miles an hour there. I mean, it's quick. It isn't enough to be going quicker than the Supervan, though. Back to McLaren, we head next. We're starting to get quite extreme in terms of our vehicles. The McLaren 650S. Now, this has got pretty much the same horsepower as the Camaro, not quite as much torque. It is about 700 pounds lighter going on here. I think tyre-wise, though, this isn't on the race tyres. But, I mean, we're now starting to get up towards quite high S1 class cars. You know, the Supervan is 828 PI, so that's Forza's rating system for the vehicle. The McLaren we're driving here is almost 880. So there's quite a big gap, again, around a circuit with any sort of straights. The McLaren is going to thrash the Supervan by virtue of its top speed. We can see its acceleration in between the corners, but when we are trying to get around the corners, we can see the smoke pouring off the car. It is a little bit more of a handful getting around here. We're well quicker than the Donkervoort. Well, that's terrible English. Much quicker than the Donkervoort down towards that final corner. We are going to be quicker over the course of the run, but it can't carry the mid-corner speed. It does make it the fastest car, sort of, I say, top out in between sections, but it just cannot carry that corner speed. We struggle with that grip, getting it around the turns. I'm surprised. I thought this was gonna be quicker than the Supervan. You can see it's sort of hard. It's not really sliding, but it's almost just enough. You can see where the car has gone in previous runs. This time it's trying to get on the throttle without exciting the rear wheels all too much through here. Not quite as good a run actually towards the final corner this time around, but it was a much neater run overall. It's 66.8. You know, it's not going to be quicker than the Supervan, and that really did surprise me. We're having to start bringing out the big guns now. One of my favourite cars overall, really, the Dodge Viper, the ACR Viper. This thing is an absolute monster. We know this is. Interestingly, tyre-wise, I think this is on the same compound tyre as the McLaren. Just looking at the tread pattern, that is curious. That is curious indeed. Now the Viper, incredibly grippy car. This one I've always loved. I mean, I'm a massive fan of Vipers to begin with. I've always loved the way the Vipers drive in Forza games. Put that together, you know, I'm always happy to have a go with this. We're starting to get up towards the higher S1 class cars running. This is slightly lower PI than the McLaren. Things that help the Viper, so two things help the Viper in its run up this course. First of all, there's a huge amount of grip. We know the ACR has a huge amount of grip. You can still slide it around if you're a lunatic, but it does have a lot of grip. The other thing that helps it is actually the gearbox in this. The ACR has some crazy long gears. You don't actually need to leave second. It's pretty much perfect. Now, it was a very scruffy first run from me. We had a really big slide. It wasn't very good at all, and I was still figuring out what I was doing with gears on that one. Once you've launched it, launch it first, you get up to second, and then you don't come out of second for the entire way. Now, this is actually quite helpful. You don't unsettle the car downshifting on the exit of corners. It's literally spot on. You get to the braking zone just as it gets to the rev limiter, and then you can sort of turn in. You don't have to worry about changing gears. You don't have to worry about unsettling the car, as I said, with your downshifting. So you can just carry the corner speed. It's literally perfect length of gears as we come around the final corner. the Viper would go faster. The Viper does go quicker. It's not by very much. We're only talking 0.1 of a second or whatever, but the Viper is the quicker car up the course. So we found something that could beat the Supervan. What happens if we go a little bit mad? Yeah, we go to Koenigsegg, because let's face it, all of their cars are quite mad, really, at the end of the day. This is the CCX. 800 horsepower going on in this one. It weighs less than 3,000 pounds, only just, but I mean, this is a ridiculous car. I love the Koenigsegg's, don't get me wrong. I wasn't really sure what to expect with this one, either. I mean, we're quite high into S1 again. Top speed-wise is going to be ridiculous, of course. It's to thrash the Supervan in a lot of tests, but this one in particular, I didn't know whether the CCX was going to have the grip to really make it work. Now, it is brutally fast between the corners. It probably will be one of the quickest cars in between the turns, but it's this, the traction, the rear-end grip, it just doesn't quite have. We're up to 100 and something miles an hour through these corners. In the first run, I mean, we're trying to get speed out of the vehicle. It's not all that easy because it wastes its time spinning the wheels a little bit. You've got to be a little bit careful. The front-end grip is okay, but it's not as good. It's not as good as we saw from the Viper or from the Camaro. The vehicles that are really going to go quickly up this course, if you like. It's just not quite got that level of grip. You've got to be so very careful with the car. I mean, it is fun, don't get me wrong. It is great fun launching this car up and around these roads. But it's certainly quite the challenge as you're trying to tame this ridiculous thing. Speed-wise, it's pretty damn good. As well as we head around the final corner, try and get on that power. It's a little bit of a slide. It doesn't beat the Supervan. It does go fairly quickly for the CCX, but it doesn't beat the Supervan. Again, not quite the result I was expecting, but it was a curious one. Now, Aventador. This is about, this is 1 PI point higher than the Koenigsegg, and I was curious to see, the Guyardo hadn't quite done what I thought it was. I did expect the Guyardo to actually beat the Ford. However, it hadn't. What if we go for something a little bit more, I say ridiculous, the Aventador, the LP 700, so we got 700 horsepower in this one. We're all-wheel drive. Okay, it is quite a heavy vehicle. It's 400 pounds lighter than the Camaro, to put it into perspective, but we're still almost 1,500 pounds heavier than the Transit. But we have all-wheel drive. We have all-wheel drive and a lot of power. So the all-wheel drive means I can use that 700 horsepower a lot better. Interestingly, doesn't get up to as high a top speeds as we saw from the CCX, like in the braking zones. Although admittedly I was a little bit wide of that first, we sort of bobbled the rocks. Or it's kind of around the similar level of the Koenigsegg to get things right. However, it's much easier to get things right with the Aventador. You have that lovely all-wheel drive safety net that it can deal with it, basically. You can jump on that, you can use the power, and that's what makes a difference. Even that first run being a little scruffy running wide, I mean, you're going to get that understeer from the Aventador as you try and jump onto the power. It's still not as quick as the CCX towards turn 1, which does, or turn 2 technically, which does kind of surprise me. It's almost as quick up this section, or about as quick. But yeah, just the safety net of the all-wheel drive is too much, and while the Supervan may be slightly better, kind of mid-corner than the Aventador, it's just too quick. It's too quick accelerating, so it will beat the Transit. Now that I'm not surprised by at all, but I was curious to see how that might fare running up this course. Now we've seen the vehicles that the van had managed to beat. I wanted to go a little bit extreme, and if we were going to beat an S2 class car, something like this, I say beat it. I was really curious to see how the Supervan would fare against the McLaren Speedtail. I'm going to be honest. This is a weird car. There's no two ways about it. I kind of like the Speedtail because it's very different to everything else, but I'm also not sure I like the Speedtail, if that makes sense. 1,000 horsepower in this one. It is the most powerful car to run up the course. 850 torque. I mean, it's a ridiculous machine, and I didn't know whether it was going to be too uncontrollable. I didn't know what it was going to be like trying to drive up this course particularly. Ultimately, I think the sheer brute power and straight line speed in this was a little bit too much. I mean, we're seeing the speed is getting up to 115 miles an hour. Well, you know, it's 10 miles an hour quicker than anything in some of these midsections, and sure enough, it is across the line. Even the first bit scruffy run, we're well over 70 miles an hour. but it isn't easy to drive up this course. I did wonder whether it was going to be too difficult to kind of slot up this route, because this is more of a top speed car. It's not necessarily designed for this sort of a course. And the fastest run actually did get a little bit of a bobble around turn 1 as well, but it's just so quick in between the corners. The front end grip isn't really there. I think it's quite small front tyres, if I remember correctly. But just power. The brute power of the Speedtail is a little bit too much, and they'll go across the line. It's a 71 mile an hour run. I mean, I was actually kind of surprised in some ways the Speedtail was that fast up the course. As far as the initial question goes, just how fast is the Supervan? Well, I mean, this is a very specialised test. It's designed to showcase the van's strength in terms of its grip, and it did a pretty damn good job. It beat a Koenigsegg CCX. It beat the McLaren 650S. It was up there with an ACR Viper. It beat the Camaro ZL1 1LE, and you know, that's impressive. I think it is mighty impressive at how fast that Supervan is. It's great fun. As I said, okay, it's not technically much of a van left in there, but it is a really cool vehicle, and when you put it on the really twisty stuff, it is ridiculously good. So there we go. Not sure a huge amount of helpful advice, just interesting to see what happens with this stuff. That is going to be it though for this video. Thank you all very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.